Imagine a prison without walls. Imagine a prison where the guards do not need to lock you in a cell because the law itself is the cage. You can walk outside. You can feel the wind on your face. You can see the horizon. You can see the King's Road stretching out into the distance, leading to the next town, leading to the coast, leading to a world you have heard about in stories. But you know, with absolute terrifying certainty, that you can never take that road. You know that if you cross the invisible boundary line of your village, you stop being a human being and become a criminal. You become a fugitive. You become a target that any man with a sword has the right to hunt down. This was the reality for 90% of the population in medieval Europe. We call them serfs. But that word feels too soft. It feels too academic. It implies that they were just workers, or employees, or perhaps humble farmers living a simple life. They were not workers. They were captives. They were caught in a trap so elaborate, so ruthless, and so brilliantly designed that freedom was not just difficult to achieve, it was mathematically and legally impossible. Welcome to medieval feudalism. We exist to expose the dark reality of the Middle Ages that textbooks try to gloss over. We are not here to talk about the glory of the Crusades or the beauty of Gothic cathedrals. We are here to talk about the human cost of those things. Today, we are stripping away the romance to look at the machinery of oppression. We are going to explain exactly how the trap worked. We are going to look at the fines that drained your pockets, the laws that chained your feet to the earth, and the psychological warfare that kept you on your knees for 500 years. If you want to understand the real history of the common man, the history of your ancestors, subscribe now. Let us open the file on serfdom. To understand why freedom was impossible, you first have to understand the legal status of a serf. In the modern world, we operate under a specific assumption that rights are inherent. You are born with them. They belong to you simply because you are a human being. In the Middle Ages, rights were property. And if you were a peasant, you did not own any. When you were born into a serf family, you were born into a legal status known in England as Villeinage. This was not a career choice. It was not a temporary condition. It was a blood curse. From the moment you took your first breath, you were already in debt. You belonged, body and soul, to the lord of the manor. Now, historians love to argue about definitions. If you pick up a textbook, they will go to great lengths to tell you that serfdom was not slavery. They will say, look, a slave is an object. A slave is chattel. A slave in ancient Rome could be sold individually, like a piece of furniture. But a serf had rights. A serf was tied to the land. They make it sound like a crucial distinction. They make it sound like a mercy, but ask yourself if it matters to the person in chains whether those chains are made of iron or made of parchment. Let's look at the reality. A slave in Rome could be sold to a new master in a different city. A serf in England was sold along with the mud he stood on. If a baron decided to sell his estate to a bishop, he did not have to ask the permission of the people living there. He simply transferred the deed. The barns, the watermill, the cows, the ploughs, and the 30 families of serfs living in the huts were all listed together in the inventory. You were not a citizen. You were a feature of the real estate. You were an asset on a balance sheet. This is where the trap begins. It starts with geography. The defining shackle of serfdom was immobility. You were legally bound to the manor. Think about what that actually means for your daily life. It means your world is effectively 3 miles wide. You will be born in this village. You will play in the mud of this village. You will work in the fields of this village. You will marry someone from this village. And you will be buried in the churchyard of this village. You are forbidden from leaving. If you wanted to walk to the nearest market town, maybe just 5 miles away to sell a carved wooden spoon or a basket of eggs, you needed a license. You had to go to the Lord's bailiff, cap in hand, and pay a fee to get a stamped piece of parchment giving you permission to travel down the road. If you were caught on the King's Highway without that parchment, you were arrested. You were not considered a traveller. You were considered a thief, and the thing you were stealing was yourself. Your body and your labour belonged to the Lord. By removing your body from his land, you were robbing him of his property. So, the first wall of the prison is distance. But the second wall is even harder to climb. The second wall is economic, so you cannot leave physically. But what about economically? Could you work hard, save money, and buy your freedom? Could you hustle your way out of the trap? This is the cruelest part of the system. The medieval economy was rigged. It was engineered to ensure that you could never save enough to escape. It was a machine designed to extract every single surplus penny you ever made and funnel it upward to the elite. Let us look at how they drained you. It started with the labour rent. You did not pay rent with coin because you did not have any. Coinage was scarce in the Middle Ages for the poor, so you paid with your life, you paid with your time, you owed the Lord labour services. This usually meant that for 3 days every single week, Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday, you were the Lord's property. You had to wake up before dawn in your freezing hut. You had to walk past your own small strip of land, which was full of weeds and needed tending. You had to walk past your own hungry family, and you had to go to the Lord's giant fields, the demesne. And for the next 12 to 14 hours, you broke your back for him. You ploughed his earth, you sowed his seeds, you harvested his grain, you fixed his fences, you cleaned his ditches. You did this until your back screamed and your hands bled. And what did you get for it? Nothing. No wages, no food, no thanks. This was just the fee for existing. This was the rent you paid for the privilege of breathing the Lord's air. That leaves you Thursday, Friday and Saturday to feed your own family. 3 days to grow enough food to keep your children alive for an entire year. It was barely enough time, but even that was a lie, because the Lord had the right to something called boon work. Imagine it is August, the harvest season. This is the most critical time of the year. The wheat is ripe, the sky is turning grey, the rain is coming. If the crops are not gathered immediately, they will rot in the field and everyone will starve. You look at your own small strip of land and you see your wheat turning golden. It needs to be cut today. But the Lord looks at his massive field and sees the same thing. Who wins? The Lord wins. He could demand that you drop everything and harvest his crops first. This was boon work, mandatory extra labor during peak times. You had to stand there and watch your own food supply rot in the rain while you secured his profit. You had to sacrifice your family's winter survival to ensure his barns were full. This was not just unfair, it was a weapon. It kept you living on the absolute edge of starvation. If you are worried about where your next meal is coming from, you do not have the energy to plot a rebellion. You do not have the resources to run away. Hunger is the ultimate chain. But let us say you survived the harvest. Let us say you had a good year. You worked extra hard on Sundays when the bailiff wasn't looking. You managed to grow a little extra barley. You have a surplus. Maybe you think, I can sell this. I can save a silver penny. I can start to build a future. This is where the fines come in. The feudal lord was the master of the microtransaction. Long before modern corporations invented hidden fees, the medieval nobility had perfected the art of the shakedown. They set up toll booths on every aspect of your existence to make sure you never accumulated wealth. First, there was the mill tax, known as multure. You cannot eat raw grain. It will break your teeth and ruin your digestion. You have to grind it into flour to make bread. Now, grinding grain is not high technology. You could easily do this at home with 2 stones, a hand mill or a quern stone. It is simple, effective and free, but the Lord says no. The Lord owns the only water mill in the village, and he passes a law. It is illegal to own a hand mill. You are forced by law to carry your heavy sacks of grain to the Lord's mill. And when you get there, the miller does not just grind it for you out of kindness. He takes a cut. He keeps a percentage of your flour, usually 1/16 or 1/20 as a fee. They monopolized your hunger. They controlled the very mechanism that turned your work into food. If the bailiff searched your cottage and found a hidden hand mill, and they did search regularly, he would drag you to the manor court. You would be fined everything you had, and he would smash your millstones to pieces in front of the village as a warning. Then there was the wood penny. You need wood. You need it to heat your drafty hut in the winter so your children don't freeze. You need it to cook your food. You live right next to a massive forest. It is full of fallen branches. It is full of dead wood. It is free fuel sitting on the ground. Can you pick it up? No, the forest belongs to the Lord. If you are caught gathering firewood without paying the wood penny, you are a poacher. You are a criminal stealing the Lord's timber. Then there was pannage. If you were lucky enough to own a pig, which was a sign of wealth for a peasant, you needed to feed it. Pigs are hungry. In the autumn, the forest floor is covered in acorns. Pigs love acorns. It creates excellent meat. It is free food raining from the trees. But you had to pay a tax called pannage just to let your pig walk into the woods and eat the acorns off the ground. Even the garbage on the forest floor had a price tag attached to it. These fees were designed to bleed you dry economically, but they were nothing compared to the taxes on your humanity. The system did not just tax your work or your food, it taxed your love, and it taxed your death. Consider the fine called merchet. This was the marriage tax. Let's create a scenario. You are a peasant father. You have a daughter named Alice. She is 18. She works hard. She falls in love with a young man named Thomas from a neighboring manor 3 miles away. They want to get married. To you, this is a moment of joy. It is the natural progression of life. But to the Lord, this is a business transaction, and it is a bad one for him. If Alice marries Thomas, she will likely move to Thomas's village. She will leave the Lord's land. That means she will stop working for him. More importantly, it means that any children she has, any future workers, will be born on another Lord's land. They will belong to someone else. The Lord is losing capital, so he demands compensation. You have to pay a heavy fine called merchet to buy your daughter's right to marry outside the manor. This was not a small fee. It could be the equivalent of a year's savings. Fathers would scrape and save for a decade, hiding pennies in a jar buried under the floor just so they could afford the permission for their children to have a life. Imagine the humiliation of that. Imagine having to walk into the manor house, bow before the man who owns you, and pay him for the privilege of letting your daughter fall in love. And then comes the final blow. The tax that truly proves freedom was impossible. The tax that shows the system had no mercy. Hear it. The death tax. Imagine the worst day of your life. It is the dead of winter. Your father dies. He was the head of the household. He was the one who knew how to fix the plow. He was the strongest worker. The family is devastated. You are grieving. But you are also terrified because you do not know how you will survive the harvest without him. While the body is still lying in the room, while the candle is still burning, there is a knock at the door. It is the bailiff. He isn't there to offer condolences. He isn't there to bring food. He isn't there to offer the Lord's help to a grieving widow. He is there for the Heriot. The law stated that when a serf died, the Lord was entitled to his best beast, the family's most valuable animal. If you had a cow that provided milk for the baby, the Lord took it. If you had an ox that pulled the plow so you could farm, the Lord took it. If you had a good horse, the Lord took it. Think about the absolute cruelty of that. At the exact moment when a family is most vulnerable, when they have lost their protector, when they are most afraid of the future, the system kicks them in the teeth. It takes the one asset that might have kept them alive. Why did they do this? Was it just pure greed? Yes, but it was also cold, calculated strategy. Heriot was a mechanism designed to destroy generational wealth. If a peasant family managed to get ahead for one generation, if they worked incredibly hard and managed to buy a second cow or save a bag of silver, death would strike. And the Lord would swoop in and reset the score to 0. It was a treadmill. You ran and ran and ran, but you never moved forward. The system ensured that every generation started at the bottom, desperate and dependent on the Lord. So why not run? Why not just pack a bag in the middle of the night, slip out the back of the hut, and disappear into the woods? People tried. God knows people tried. But the trap had answers for that too. First, there was the hue and cry. This was the medieval alert system. If a serf went missing, the Lord would sound the alarm. He would alert the entire region. He would send riders to the nearby market towns. He would offer bounties for your capture. And you have to remember that you cannot blend in. You look like a serf. You have the rough, weather-beaten skin of a field worker. You have calloused hands. You have a specific haircut that marks your station. You're wearing clothes made of rough, undyed wool spun in your own village. You speak with a specific village dialect. If you are walking down the King's Highway, anyone who sees you knows exactly what you are. You are a runner. You are a fugitive. If you are caught on the road, you are brought back in chains. And then came the punishment. They wouldn't just put you back to work. They had to make an example of you so the others wouldn't get any ideas. Runaways were often branded. They would take a hot iron and burn a mark into your forehead or your cheek. It was a permanent scar that told the world, I tried to steal myself. It destroyed any chance you ever had of blending in somewhere else. Sometimes they would cut the hamstrings, the tendons in the back of your leg, so you could walk to the fields, but you could never run again. But what about the loophole? You might have heard of a famous medieval law called town air makes free. It sounds like hope. The rule was that if a serf could escape his manor, make it to a chartered city, a city with a royal charter, and live there for a year and a day without being caught, he became a free man. The lord lost his claim. It sounds like a game show challenge. Survive 366 days and win your freedom. But in reality, it was a lottery ticket, and the odds were rigged. First, you had to get to a city. Medieval England, for example, didn't have many big cities. London, York, Bristol, Norwich. If you lived in a rural village, the nearest chartered city might be 50 or 60 miles away. Making that journey on foot, without food, without a map, and without getting caught by the Lord's bounty hunters was almost a suicide mission. And let's say you made it. Let's say you slipped through the gates of London. Now what? You have to survive a year, but you have no legal status. You are an illegal immigrant in your own country. You cannot join a guild, which means you cannot get a legitimate job as a carpenter or a baker or a blacksmith. You cannot rent a room legally. You have to live in the slums. You have to take the worst, dirtiest, most dangerous jobs cleaning cesspits, begging, stealing. You have to live in the shadows, and every single day, for a year, you have to look over your shoulder, because the lords had agents in the cities. They bribed the city watch to look for runaways. If you were caught on day 365, one day before your freedom, you went back to the chains. Escaping serfdom was like escaping a maximum security prison, where the guards are everywhere and the civilians are paid to snitch on you. But the most powerful part of the trap was not the fines. It was not the laws. It was not the brandings. It was the mind. Think about the numbers. In any given region, there might be a few hundred knights and nobles, and there might be 50,000 peasants. The math is overwhelmingly on the side of the serfs. If they all decided, on the same day, to grab their pitchforks, their scythes, and their axes and march on the castle, they could burn it to the ground in an afternoon. And sometimes they did. Peasant revolts happened. The Peasants' Revolt of 1381 in England is a famous example. But they were rare. They were the exception, not the rule. For the most part, people accepted this misery for centuries. They lived in it. They died in it. Why? Because the feudal system had a partner that provided the ultimate psychological lock. We are talking about the church. Now, we have to be careful here. We are not talking about faith. We are not talking about the spiritual belief in God. For the peasant, faith was real. It was their comfort. It was the only light in a dark world. But we are talking about the institutional church as a political power. In the Middle Ages, the church was the media. It was the school system. It was the government. It was the internet. It was the only source of information about how the universe worked. And the message they broadcast, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, was simple. This is God's will. The church taught a concept called the Great Chain of Being. This was the idea that the universe was a rigid hierarchy established by the Creator. God was at the top, the angels were below him, then the Pope, then the kings, then the nobles, and at the very bottom, in the mud, was you. This was not just a social structure, it was a divine structure. They taught that God chose the king to be king. God chose the Lord to be the Lord. And God chose you to be a serf. To rebel against your Lord was not just a crime, it was not just dangerous, it was a sin, it was blasphemy. It was telling God that he made a mistake. Imagine the village priest. He is the only educated man you know. He holds the keys to salvation. He reads to you from the Bible, which is in Latin, so you cannot check his work, and he tells you every Sunday, servants, obey your masters. He tells you that your suffering in this life is a test. He tells you that poverty is a virtue. He tells you that the rich man has his reward now, but you will have your reward later. He tells you that if you obey your master and pay your fines and work yourself to death without complaint, you will be rewarded with a palace in the kingdom of heaven. The Lord has his castle now, they would say, but you will have your castle in eternity. It was the perfect scam. The lords took your wheat in this life, and the church promised you a feast in the next one, a feast that cost them absolutely nothing to promise. This was the ultimate control mechanism. It stripped you of the will to fight. It is hard to rebel against a man with a sword. It is impossible to rebel against a man who holds the keys to heaven and hell. So you stay, you work. You pay the mill tax. You pay the marriage tax. You give up your best cow when your father dies. You watch your children grow up to inherit the same debt, the same mud, the same horizon. You live your entire life within a 3-mile radius. And you die on the same patch of dirt where you were born, hoping that maybe, just maybe, the priest was right and there is something better waiting for you on the other side. This was the horrifying trap of the Middle Ages. It was a total system of control. It controlled your body through geography laws. It controlled your labor through forced work. It controlled your money through extractive fines. And it controlled your soul through fear of damnation. Freedom was impossible because the system was engineered to make it impossible. The serf was not a citizen. He was not a participant in society. He was a battery. He was a fuel source burned to keep the lights on in the castle. He was the human foundation upon which the entire fantasy of chivalry and romance was built. We look back at the Middle Ages and we see the tournaments and the banquets. But we need to remember that every glass of wine the king drank was paid for by the sweat of a serf. Every suit of armor a knight wore was bought with the grain taken from a starving peasant family. But there is one final piece of the puzzle we have not touched on yet. We have talked about the laws. We have talked about the traps. But laws are just words on paper unless someone enforces them. The Lord is just one man. He cannot force 1,000 peasants to harvest his wheat by himself. He cannot force a whole village to give up their cows by himself. He needs muscle. He needs enforcers. He needs a group of men who are trained to kill, trained to terrorize, and trained to keep the population in line without mercy. We call them knights. And in our next video, we are going to tell you the truth about them. We are going to strip away the shining armor and the stories of rescuing damsels. We are going to show you why chivalry was not a code of honor. It was a gangster code of silence. We are going to show you how the knights were the made men of the medieval mafia, the brutal enforcers who kept the trap shut tight. If you want to see the history that the system tried to hide, make sure you are subscribed to Medieval Feudalism. We are rewriting the history books one dark truth at a time. This is Medieval Feudalism. Thanks for watching.